Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take a deep dive into the extraordinary work of Rick Atkinson and his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, An Army at Dawn: The War in North Africa, 1942-1943. This deep dive is tailor-made for you, the curious learner, looking for that shortcut to becoming well-informed, without getting lost in an ocean of details. Our mission today is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and surprising facts from Atkinson's meticulous research, making you feel like an expert on this pivotal, often overlooked moment in history.
And what's truly fascinating about An Army at Dawn, I think, is that it's so much more than just a military history. Atkinson crafts, well, a really profound exploration of how America, basically thrust onto the global stage, learned to fight a modern war almost from scratch. It's also a deep dive into the excruciating complexities of coalition warfare, where allies often distrusted each other almost as much as their common enemy, and of course the brutal, often unseen realities faced by individual soldiers.
Right, so we're going to unpack the full scope of this incredible account.
Yeah.
We'll trace the earliest, somewhat reluctant days of American involvement in World War II through the ambitious planning of Operation Torch. That's the Allied invasion of North Africa.
Yeah.
Then we'll move into the harrowing landings and the grinding, often chaotic campaigns that followed, which ultimately culminated in Allied victory and a newfound, very hard-won understanding of what it really takes to wage war.
Exactly.
So as we journey through this foundational moment for the modern American military, we'll constantly ask, what does this all mean for us today, and what were those enduring lessons that shaped the rest of the war?
Well, to understand the significance, you really have to set the scene. The world in 1940 was truly on the brink. France had been completely smashed up, its army just collapsing under the German blitzkrieg.
Right.
The Dunkirk evacuation, while miraculous in saving soldiers, left Britain effectively alone, facing a continent dominated by the Axis. You had German spearheads sweeping across places like the Place de la Concorde in Paris, and Mussolini, eager to get in on Hitler's triumphs, officially joined the Axis. Then, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. A devastating surprise attack.
And then Hitler declares war on the U.S.
Hitler and Mussolini declare war on the U.S., yeah. Which historians often argue was arguably Hitler's gravest miscalculation. It brought the full industrial might, the human potential of the United States, directly into the war against him.
But America itself was, well, putting it mildly, deeply unprepared for this global conflict, wasn't it? The details Atkinson unearths about the state of the military are just astonishing.
They really are.
He highlights these incredibly high rejection rates for psychiatric reasons during recruitment. Some screenings apparently went no further than a blunt, "Do you like girls?"
Yeah, it's amazing. One wit even suggested the Army didn't want maladjusted soldiers, at least below the rank of major, which kind of highlights the scale of the challenge, right?
It really does. And Gallup polls from the time found American youth, described by some as flabby, pacifistic yellow. And that famous quote from a social scientist comparing making a soldier out of an American citizen to domesticating a very wild species of animal.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Can you imagine? Soldiers were even booing President Roosevelt in newsreels. This was hardly a nation chomping at the bit for war.
No, it truly wasn't. And this initial reluctance, this unpreparedness, it really underscores just how transformative the North African campaign was. It forced this fundamental shift from a peacetime mindset to a nation actually capable of total war. And while America was finding its footing, the British, they'd already endured so much hardship, they were incredibly cautious.
Understandably so.
Yeah, they'd been kicked off the continent 3 times: Dunkirk, Norway, Greece. They were exceptionally reluctant to risk a direct cross-channel attack against Hitler's fortress Europe. Churchill himself was apparently haunted by the prospect of bodies floating in the channel, terrified of a disastrous Allied defeat that could, quite literally, lose the war.
So that brings us to the North Africa plan, Operation Torch. But here's where it gets really interesting, like you said, the coalition aspect. The American military vehemently disagreed with this strategy.
Oh, vehemently. They saw North Africa as a defeatist sideshow. Their view was it was only an indirect contribution to the defeat of the Nazis, a diversion from the main effort, which they thought should be crossing the channel.
So a deep strategic divide right from the start. Even before the first shot was fired, these Allied tensions, particularly between the British and Americans, were already sort of seething beneath the surface. What was Roosevelt's thinking then, pushing this against his own military's advice?
Well, Roosevelt had what Atkinson calls a commanding idea for North Africa. He saw it as a vital way to get American forces into the fight against Germany quickly, gain invaluable combat experience, and importantly, relieve some pressure on the Soviets on the Eastern Front.
Okay.
And this was during the summer of '42, remember, a period when global news was just utterly bleak. Stalingrad was starting its horrific siege. German U-boats were running rampant in the Atlantic. The Guadalcanal campaign in the Pacific was a bloody mess. 4 of America's 7 carriers already sunk.
A really grim picture.
Absolutely. And amidst all this, Dwight D. Eisenhower gets appointed Commander-in-Chief of Operation Torch in August. His appointment itself kind of speaks volumes about the political and diplomatic tightrope walking this operation required.
And Eisenhower, who Roosevelt famously, or maybe infamously, called a pig-headed Dutchman, he was under intense pressure about who should actually be in the invading force, right? Roosevelt insisted on almost no British ground troops in the initial landings. Why?
It all stemmed from this really deep, seething French Anglophobia in North Africa. It was a legacy of recent, painful history. You had incidents like RAF bombings accidentally killing French civilians, British interventions in Syria and Madagascar.
Right.
But perhaps most devastatingly, the Royal Navy's attack at Mers el-Kabir back in 1940, that was a preemptive strike against the French fleet to stop it falling into German hands, but it resulted in the, horrifying slaughter of 1,200 French sailors.
Oh, wow. I hadn't realized the numbers were that high.
Yeah, so you can imagine the level of animosity still lingering. Eisenhower had to navigate this incredibly complex political minefield while also preparing for this massive, unprecedented amphibious invasion.
And this complex political backdrop just compounded the incredible logistical chaos that seemed to plague the preparations for Torch. Patton leading the Western Task Force, he approached it with typical intensity, didn't he?
Oh, classic Patton. Famously told his senior commanders, "If you don't succeed, I don't want to see you alive," trying to put iron in their souls, as he put it. But despite that, the docks were apparently a scene of utter anarchy. Loading plans for ships changing 6 times in an hour. Just imagine the confusion.
Impossible.
They even had to recruit bibulous seamen, basically drunks from Norfolk jail, to man some of the ships, like the Contessa.
You're kidding?
Nope. And for the troops themselves, disembarkation was a nightmare. There was this senseless confusion of alphabetical boarding, causing thousands to just wander for hours trying to find their ships.
Oh, my goodness.
And then in a moment of, maybe misguided optimism or just youthful high spirits, some soldiers inflated condoms with notes, floated them into town, trying to connect with locals before they even landed.
It sounds like something out of a dark comedy, true.
A dark comedy with incredibly high stakes, yeah. Meanwhile, Eisenhower's HQ, carved out of a converted convent at Gibraltar, was this subterranean village plagued by sewers, rats, and dripping water. A really stark, unglamorous command center.
And the British had their own logistical nightmares, too.
Oh, yes. 260,000 tons of supplies misplaced back in the UK, a staggering 20% pilferage rate from the docks. And amidst all this chaos, Eisenhower, maybe, as Atkinson puts it, not as embarrassed as perhaps he should have been, was requesting things like barber chairs and a bulletproof 7-passenger automobile.
The contrast is just jarring, isn't it? Especially when you compare it to the troops. You mentioned the officers having almost a Cunard cruise experience on the way over.
Weirdly languorous, Atkinson calls it. Tea, printed menus, Indian cabin boys asking, "Bath, Sahib." This really privileged atmosphere stood in stark relief to the grim realities waiting for them, and, crucially, the shocking lack of readiness for many units.
Like a 1st Armored Division.
Exactly. America's premier armored unit, supposedly ready for desert combat, received no desert training whatsoever. Initially assessed by British observers as not worth a damn. That was the state of affairs as they approached the biggest amphibious landing in history up to that point.
Incredible. How was troop morale holding up with all this?
Despite all these issues, a sense of purpose did start to solidify. Once the troops finally learned their destination was Algeria, the initial grumbling apparently subsided, replaced by a kind of nervous anticipation.
Okay.
There were moments of panic, of course, porpoises mistaken for torpedoes, that sort of thing, but also remarkable displays of camaraderie, like British Tommies sewing American flags on their sleeves, saying, "Long as it saves lives, we don't care if we wear the bloody Chinese flag."
That's actually quite moving. A pragmatic unity.
It really is. It illustrates something emerging despite the higher level tensions. And the cultural advice pamphlet issued to the American troops had some notable tips.
Oh, yeah.
Things like never smoke or spit in front of a mosque, and perhaps surprisingly for us today, When you see grown men walking hand in hand, ignore it. They are not queer.
Wow. A different time. The stage was certainly set for a complex, chaotic, and utterly transformative campaign.
And transformational it was, right from the invasion's first moments, marked by peril and really hard lessons. The complex politics didn't stop, even before the landings at Churchill. You had French General Henri Giraud demanding supreme command, insisting he outranked Eisenhower.
How did that go down?
It led to American Major General Mark Clark apparently retorting very bluntly to Giraud, "Old gentleman, I hope you know that from now on your ass is out in the snow." A moment that Atkinson says left Eisenhower utterly exhausted by the sheer political wrangling.
I can only imagine. But this political infighting was tragically overshadowed by some real tactical blunders, wasn't it? Like Operation Reservist.
Oh, Reservist at Oran was infamous, conceived as a Trojan horse operation. 2 flimsy American Coast Guard cutters trying to assault a heavily defended port, basically bluffing.
Sounds risky.
It was complete catastrophe. One cutter, the Walney, got rammed, raked with broadsides. Men were apparently murdered in the water swimming for shore, over 90% casualties.
Devastating.
And then the absurdity continues. The French later billed the Allies for pilotage fees for the destroyed ships.
You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all disaster, right? There were successes.
No, absolutely. Darby's Rangers, the elite commando unit, they successfully captured Fort de la Pointe and Port du Nord using Bangalore torpedoes, those long explosive tubes for clearing obstacles. It showed the value of specialized units. And you had colorful figures like Major General Terry Allen, a real American Hotspur who had this ruthless philosophy. A soldier doesn't fight to save suffering humanity. He fights to prove that his unit is the best in the army.
A compelling, if brutal, insight into motivation.
And speaking of larger-than-life figures, Ted Roosevelt Jr.
Yes, Teddy Roosevelt's son. A brigadier general, truly a force of nature, drove his Rough Rider Jeep fearlessly into the thick of it, shouting, "Get on your feet, keep moving." Bookmakers apparently gave him 10-to-1 odds against surviving 2 weeks in combat.
No way. But he was remarkably hard to kill. However, the American paratrooper operation, codenamed Villain, that proved to be a significant failure. It used up half of all Allied parachute forces available at the time for very little strategic gain. Atkinson calls it temerity untempered by judgment. Another harsh lesson.
A steep learning curve indeed. And the political chaos continued in Algiers.
Oh, Algiers was, as Atkinson describes it, an opera bouffe, a comic opera. With the capture of the high-ranking French admiral Jean-François Darlan, Darlan, initially a Vichy collaborator, exhibited these astounding moral gyrations.
How so?
His allegiances flipped completely. One day, November 8th, we fight everybody. November 11th night, we fight nobody, as he suddenly switched to the Allied side, much to their, well, exasperation and suspicion.
What a mess. But for the soldiers on the ground, the lessons were more visceral.
Absolutely. Men like Major General Moore, who survived a sniper's bullet hitting his helmet. That experience taught him profound lessons. Battlefields were inherently chaotic, that improvisation was a necessary virtue, that speed and stealth and firepower won small skirmishes as well as big battles, that every moment held risk and every man was mortal. Hard-won insights learned in the crucible.
You can only learn that through experience, I suppose. And while all this brutal learning was happening, you had the Casablanca Conference in January 43, which seemed almost detached from it all.
It did seem like a different reality, an ice cream front atmosphere, Atkinson calls it. You had the glamour of Churchill and Roosevelt meeting juxtaposed with the very real need to test all their food for poisons.
Right.
And the influx of WAC captains Women's Army Auxiliary Corps showing the broader mobilization back home. But despite that glamour, the fighting hadn't stopped. The naval battle off Casablanca during the landings was incredibly fierce.
The French resisted strongly.
With passion, Atkinson writes, even though they were outmatched. American ships described as tearing into action like a pack of dogs unleashed. Smoke, fire, near misses from French torpedoes. It was intense.
And even Patton, despite his reputation, faced chaos during his landings.
Yeah, his own orgy of disorder at Fadala. Troops scattered over 42 miles of coastline, making coordination a nightmare. Only 5 of his 77 tanks got ashore on the first day.
Wow.
He candidly admitted, had the landings been opposed by Germans, we would never have gotten ashore. And this early chaos, this unreadiness, even in victory, it only fed that growing toxic tone within the alliance.
You mentioned the friction earlier.
It got worse. British officers, frustrated by American inexperience, started referring to Americans as our Italians, which was, not a compliment in that context, and crashing pores. While the Americans coined their own dismissive phrase, the British cope, we fix, showing that kind of can-do versus make-do tension.
And this friction went right to the top. Eisenhower felt the pressure
Immensely. He apparently raged privately about being constantly dragged into political squabbles, feeling like a lemon to be squeezed dry and then discarded. He even confided that he truly believed he was the best damn lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, suggesting a deep frustration with the high-level political demands.
Understandable, maybe.
And this early period was also marked by just tragic, avoidable errors, like a horrific friendly fire incident near Medjez El Bab, where US P-38 Lightning strafed American tank destroyers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, highlighting the chaos of air-ground coordination. It led to grim jokes about Stuka time, when German dive bombers ruled the skies, versus Spitfire time, when Allied air cover made things safer. Painful early lessons.
And those lessons kept coming with the hard grind of the Tunisian winter campaign, right?
Absolutely brutal conditions. The war correspondent, Ernie Pyle, who was right there with the troops, coined the term mud, rain, frost, and wind boys to describe them. Constant, miserable weather and the inescapable stench of human waste. Yet, amidst it all, Atkinson notes these moments of ironic beauty, like a poet's dream sky on clear nights. But the fighting, like at Beja, was incredibly grim. British forces had initial success, then got hit by intense Stuka-bouncing repeated dive-bombing attacks that just reduced the town to rubble, made it literally impossible to unstink the dead.
Just horrific. And Medjez El Bab remained strategically important.
Critically important. The Axis forces, under General Naring, started a significant buildup there, issuing fight-to-the-last-man orders. And crucially, Allied intelligence drastically underestimated their numbers, a major failure.
And adding to the Allied problems was their own command issues. Friedendahl's HQ.
General Lloyd Friedendahl. He became infamous for his luxurious bomb-proof Speedy Valley headquarters, excavated miles from the front lines, while his frontline engineers and troops suffered from neglect, lack of resources. It was a terrible look.
A real disconnect.
A huge disconnect. It just worsened a situation where, as Atkinson puts it, mistrust cascaded like a rock slide within the Allied command, contradictory orders, poor coordination. It all set the stage for one of America's worst military debacles of the war.
Kasserine Pass.
Kasserine Pass, February 1943, unequivocally the worst American drubbing of the war. Rommel's forces, even with some weaknesses in his Italian units, just inflicted heavy casualties on the inexperienced Americans.
Why was it so bad?
A combination of things. American inexperience, leadership failures. Friedendahl's command was disastrous, and just a vast disparity in combat readiness compared to the battle-hardened Germans.
And the British assessment was harsh.
Scathing. General Harold Alexander said of the Americans, they simply do not know their job as soldiers. The junior leader just does not lead. Brutal, but probably necessary. It forced a real reckoning within the American military.
But the ordinary soldier fought bravely.
Ernie Pyle observed exactly that. There was nothing wrong with the common American soldier. In fact, Atkinson argues a ruthless killing spirit actually began to emerge from the havoc of Kasserine, forged in the fire of defeat. It was a painful turning point.
That sense of transformation through failure is powerful.
Yeah.
And there were painful lessons about equipment, too. American armor.
Oh, yes. The main gun on early American tanks, the 37mm, was nicknamed the Squirrel Rifle because it was just woefully inadequate against German armor.
Not good.
And the iconic Sherman tank, while produced in huge numbers, earned the grim nickname Ronsons after the cigarette lighter slogan because they tended to light every time when hit. Serious design flaws leading to high crew casualties.
Wow, Ronsons.
Yeah. And tactics like rat racing, desperate, often uncoordinated charges proved devastatingly ineffective. The psychological toll on soldiers was immense. Atkinson describes men literally beating their heads against foxholes, foaming at the mouth, attempting suicide.
Unimaginable stress.
Or, in the absolute depths of horror, using dead bodies as shields. There was this chilling personification of terror, Hermann the German, who soldiers imagined stalking through hospital wards. The psychological scars were deep.
And even Eisenhower felt the weight.
Immensely. He dictated personal apologies for Kasserine Pass, struggled with the constant political and economic matters that he claimed took up at least 9 of his 10 working hours each week. A huge burden.
This period really sounds like the harsh school of war. But then, as spring arrived in 1943, things started to turn.
They did. The Allied armies began to effectively hammer home the cork, as Atkinson puts it, bottling up the Axis forces in Tunisia. Despite some lingering issues, Montgomery, the British commander, being maybe a poor finisher at the Meath line, and Patton making sarcastic remarks about the great and famous Battle of Gafsa, which was a relatively minor skirmish he felt was overblown.
Right.
Despite that, the tide undeniably began to turn. Those painful lessons from Kasserine and earlier fights were finally taking root. Coordination improved, operations became more effective.
But the fighting remained brutal.
Incredibly brutal. At El Guitar, Derby's Rangers again distinguished themselves, inflicting heavy casualties, this time on Italian troops. And it was here that Ted Roosevelt Jr. earned the Distinguished Service Cross for his incredibly cool leadership under intense fire, just inspiring his men.
That unfinished letter you mentioned.
Yeah, found on a dead soldier there.
Oh, yeah.
Just started. Well, folks, we stopped the best they had. Speaks volumes about the sacrifice, doesn't it?
It really does. And the mountain fighting.
A constant, grim feature of Tunisia. Bodies described as being thick as currants in cake, the stench of death pervasive, the sheer difficulty of digging even shallow graves in solid rock. Just agonizing work. And even during this final push, the infighting and command changes continued. Oh yeah, the coalition friction never entirely went away. General Orlando Ward was relieved by Harman Atkinson, suggests it was a necessary man-making decision to improve leadership, and you still had instances of British prejudice, like General Crocker's reported disdain for American fantasy and ignorance. But despite these persistent internal issues, the strategic victory was becoming undeniable and profound. The Allies started taking 1,000 Axis prisoners daily. Ultimately, 200,000 were penned up like sheep.
An entire continent reclaimed.
Exactly. And the Mediterranean Sea was effectively converted from this dangerous, contested waterway into an Anglo-American lake. That massively shortened supply lines and opened up huge new strategic possibilities, like the invasion of Sicily.
And air power played a big role in this final phase. Operation FLAX.
A critical role. The Air Blitz, particularly Operation FLAX, was a sustained Allied air campaign designed specifically to destroy Axis air power in North Africa and prevent their escape or resupply by air.
Was it successful?
Hugely successful. Hundreds of Axis aircraft were destroyed. It got so bad that Goering, head of the Luftwaffe, had to insist on desperate night flights for transport. Allied airfields, meanwhile, were invested with cockiness due to their complete air superiority.
So the end was near for the Axis in Africa.
It was. In the final moments, though, the remaining Axis forces fought with what Atkinson calls homicidal desperation. General Jürgen von Arnim, the overall Axis commander after Rommel left, apparently engaged in animated theological discussions with his staff about the ethics of fighting to the last bullet. A grim sign of defeat.
And the Afrika Korps itself.
General Gustav Kramer, who took command of the remnants of the Afrika Korps, sent a final, stark message. The Afrika Korps has fought itself to the condition where it can fight no more. It was over. In a final, symbolic act, Arnim even personally burned Rommel's command trailer, signifying the end of an era.
What an extraordinary journey. Really through a pivotal, yet, as you said, often overlooked chapter of World War II. From that initial, almost bumbling start, the profound human cost, to the eventual hard-won triumph. An Army at Dawn truly shows how a nation and its army found its footing and transformed on the battlefield.
Absolutely. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the North African campaign established patterns that really defined the next 2 years of the war in Europe. It revealed an American army that was initially unready, yes, but also possessed this incredible will, this inventiveness to prevail. They learned vital, incredibly hard-won lessons about leadership, about logistics, about the complex dance of coalition warfare, and just the sheer brutal realities of modern combat. These experiences were absolutely fundamental to their eventual success in Sicily, Italy, and ultimately Normandy.
The book leaves you with this incredible sense of just how far these forces came. Transforming from that state of near chaos and infighting to a coordinated, effective fighting machine that defeated 2 entire Axis armies. It's a powerful testament to learning under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
It really is. And it raises an important question, I think, that resonates beyond the battlefield. In any endeavor, really, whether it's military, personal, professional, when does that sheer tenacity, combined with learning from bitter lessons, finally transform into unshakable resolve and eventual undeniable success?
That's a great thought to leave our listeners with. Think about that. What stands out to you from this deep dive into An Army at Dawn? Kilroy had been here, and now he prepared to move on indeed.